It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dew, Chief Librarian Thomas Senna, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dew.
Yes, hello, and welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Today we are doing our customary end-of-season extravaganza. It's the SNL Hall of Fame Roundtable for Season 4. This is the show in which we invite SNL Hall of Fame voters to share their ballots and their thought processes behind their choices. So this is always an interesting exercise to get into the psyche of some of our voters. Previous roundtables, panelists have cut deals with one another for votes, changed each other's minds. We've had wheeling and dealing, all kinds of shenanigans have happened in these roundtables. I always love doing these. Maybe that'll happen today with our fantastic panel of heavy hitters in the SNL community. I'm honored to have these gentlemen with me. So let's start the introductions. And I actually want to do a little bit of an icebreaker as well. So when I introduce you guys, I'm going to ask the question, which current cast member, not including Kenan Thompson, because I think we could probably all agree he's the obvious one to be in the SNL Hall of Fame. So which current cast member, not including Kenan, could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday? So let's get it going from the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. He's the co-host of that podcast with Gary Seath. He was my guest for Michael O'Donoghue, he and Gary, this season on Season 4 of the SNL Hall of Fame. We're joined by Brad Robinson. Hello, sir. How you doing tonight?
Thomas, hello. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm ecstatic to be here.
Wonderful. You guys are doing a hell of a job on the Not Ready for Primetime podcast.
Thank you. You guys have been so kind to us, and it's been great. So thank you so much, and we love having you on. And so, yeah, I appreciate it.
Man, I'm a fan. So to the question, which current cast member, not including Kenan, could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday?
David Spade's not on the show anymore, right?
David Spade, is he? No. I'm being told David Spade's not on the show.
Sometimes labeled old. I go with Ego. I love Ego. I think she's great. I think she needs more seasons, but I love watching her. And if she sticks around long enough, I think she'd be my number one candidate.
I would agree. I think there's a path to Ego being in that upper echelon of cast members. I really love Ego stuff. I think that's a great answer, Brad. Also joining us from the Saturday Night Network Superfans, and he was my guest for Jason Sudeikis this season, we have Mr. Bill Kenney. Hello, Bill.
Hey, Thomas. So great to be back. Haven't been on a roundtable in a couple of seasons, so I'm excited to announce my ballot and take some prisoners here.
Yes, Bill's ruthless. He's cutthroat in these things. Watch out. Yeah. So, Bill, Brad said Ego. I don't know if you agree or if you have, and also if you have your own current cast member who could be in the SNL Hall of Fame someday.
I think Ego's on a great trajectory, but my choice would be Heidi Gardner. As anyone who's heard me talk knows, I think she's great. I think she's Jan Hooks-esque, which, Thomas, you know what that means to me. So, yeah, I think she needs a couple of really strong seasons to round out her career, but she could be there for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. We love Heidi, and I think I hope she stays a few more seasons to see her resume keep growing. That's a really great choice, Bill. And also, third person on the panel joining me from Saturday Night Network By the Numbers show. First timer here on the SNL Hall of Fame. I was on the SNN By the Numbers recently, so we're doing a little home and home here, which is awesome. And someone who Mikey Day, I know, admires very much. Mike Murray. Thanks for coming by, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Thomas. You were a great guest on By the Numbers this year, and it's happy to join you guys for this. And it was fun to look at that ballot and wow, there's some that are obvious and some that I could make a really strong case for.
Yeah, I'm interested to get your perspective because you talk a lot of current SNL. Of course, you go into the numbers on the current season. So I'm interested to get your perspective on SNL history as well.
Yeah, it's different for me. The prep for this show, like looking back, and they're all people that are off the show, of course. So I have stats going back, screen time appearances from season 44 till now. So it's about 103 or 4 episodes that I have complete data on. But looking back at these, I'm like, I can't wait to get back there.
So yeah, so you're definitely, this is going to be cool to see a little analytical perspective on the SNL Hall of Fame ballot. That's awesome. So which current cast member could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday, Mike?
So I didn't know we were going to pick one. So I think it's a strong cast.
I mean, you could pick
I'm going to stick with one to match my contemporaries here. But there can be a case for both, and I also wrote down three writers that I'd put in there too. But I'm going to go with Bowen Yang. I think that what Bowen's brought to the show and made an impact so quickly in the stacked cast of the Cecily, Adie, Kate, Pete, Beck era of the show that was so dominant, that Bowen came in with Chloe near the end of that and impact right away, and I could just see... I like to think of people who have this type of sketch. So some people don't like that, but where someone has like, oh, this is this person's sketch. But I think with Bowen Yang, his type of comedy is unique to him and has made the show great the past few years, even when it's not been so great. So I'm going to go with Bowen.
Yeah, I'll say this about Bowen for sure. He's had moments that really stick out. And I think years down the line, a lot of people remember SNL throughout the years and they have moments in their head. And I think Bowen has a lot of those, like the iceberg is one of them. Actually, a lot of his Weekend Update appearances are moments that people will just remember fondly, I think. I'm interested because I asked this question last year on the Roundtable. People brought up Che and Jost as a duo. So I'm curious, like Bill, like what would you think of like Che and Jost possibly as a duo going into the Hall of Fame?
Well, that's interesting because we've been on the Saturday Night Network, as you know, Thomas, you've been on doing the greatest cast members of all time. And there are two that didn't make the top 50, but on my list they did, and they are right next to each other. I don't think you can talk about one without the other. It's not like Tina, who worked with Amy and Jimmy. It's not like Amy, who worked with Seth and Tina. So they've been together for so long. They've hosted Weekend Update for so long that, yeah, I think they are Hall of Famers. I think they're in the top 3 of Weekend Update anchors of all time.
Yeah, I think they would go.
That's high praise.
That's huge. Yeah, coming from you, I think they would probably go in as writers. So it was brought up like Che and Jost as a writing team, and we do have a writing team. We have Lonely Island already in the SNL Hall. We have a writing team up for consideration on this ballot. So it'd almost be like Che and Jost as writers together, I think. And I agree. I think Che and Jost, for my money, they're my favorite Weekend Update folks of all time. So I think,
And they have the record for longest update hosts, both individually and together.
Really? Oh my gosh. See?
They passed Seth Meyers in October of 2021.
That's right.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with them is, and some people would disagree with this, I'm not in a rush to see them leave. I still think they've got it. A lot of the time with Weekend Update, by the 5th or 6th or 7th season, you're like, all right, this is, they're doing the same thing, same shtick. And they do have some of the same mannerisms, same things that they go to. But I think that there's enough difference, and they still bring the funny. They have the Norm Macdonald type snark to, at least Che does. So I think I'd like to see them at least through the 50th.
Yeah, I think maybe they become so reliable, in my opinion, that it's almost boring to some folks at this point. I think it's just they kind of take for granted that there's not a lot of variance. Like you're not get like a really sucky Weekend Update, but maybe for some people there's not a high ceiling anymore as far as how good it's going to be. So I can definitely understand that. Brad, do you have thoughts about this?
I agree with your point there. I think I don't not enjoy them, but I feel like they've been there long enough. I'd like to see somebody new do it. They kind of, what you're getting every time. It is what it is. And I think I'd like to see somebody fresh in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. So thanks for sharing that little icebreaker question. And let's get into the the rules of the game here as far as sharing your ballots and voting and whatnot. So rules are simple. You all have, every Hall of Fame voter has up to 15 votes. You can use one vote if you'd like, though from looking at the ballot, that would just mean you're an SNL Grinch. I'm not pointing at anybody in particular on this panel when I say that. I'm just saying that you'd be an SNL Grinch if you just use like 1 or 2 votes. So up to 15. We might shame you if you use just a handful. So. And I want to know from you guys before we get into the nominees and your ballots. I'm always interested how many votes that you're kind of planning on using heading into this. So I want to start with you, Mike. Like going into this, are you using all 15? Are you being a little more tight with the votes? What's your process?
Well, I'm definitely in sports and elsewhere a small hall guy. So in the first season of this show, I was very conservative with people that have to be in there. I mean, we can make that case for so many of these great names, but I was pretty conservative my first ballot. Of course, being on today and seeing who's left, who's been on multiple ballots and hasn't got in, I feel like there's a responsibility on my part to give some support to those that we don't want them to be dropped into the trash heap. So I had to maybe be a little bit more liberal today. So I think I have 13 or 14 on my ballot today.
Yeah, that's a good number. And I think that's a good point. So if somebody hasn't been elected to the hall after 5 voting rounds, so 5 seasons on the ballot, then they're eliminated from the ballot. So that's, you have that under consideration. I know heading into this, I think it was Brad reached out and said, hey, this is information I want to know. And so, yeah, so it's 5 voting cycles. And if they're not on in the hall after that, then much like the Baseball Hall of Fame, then they're just off the ballot. The voters have spoken, and they would be off the ballot. So
is there a legacy committee?
You know what? There is. Yeah, it's the Don Pardo Award. And so the first inductee this year, thanks for bringing that up, Mike, was Don Pardo. So it's almost like a veterans committee. We named it after Don Pardo. So Don Pardo is in the SNL Hall of Fame, and he didn't get voted in. It was just we decided on the committee to vote him in. Next season, there's going to be another person or people receiving the Don Pardo Award, an automatic. It's almost like baseball veterans committee in a little way. Yeah. So, Bill, what's your strategy? How many votes are you using coming in?
Well, I learned something new about my good friend Mike tonight. Small hall guy. That's interesting. I am a big hall guy. I think that if you've earned your right, you definitely deserve to be in. I have no problem having, as long as they are deserving. I don't think, especially with a show with the history of SNL, with all the different categories, with the writing and with the hosts and musical guests, and obviously the cast, you got to have a big ballot. So I've got 15. 15.
I think, looking at the ballot, it's pretty stacked. I think a lot of nominees who probably should be in. I know this is a subjective thing, but a lot of nominees probably should be in who aren't. So I think 15 is very fair. Brad, what's your thought process coming in?
Well, Thomas, I didn't want to disappoint, whether you want to call it a grump or Grinch or whatever. Coming in, literally probably 3 minutes before we signed on, I had 11 votes.
Okay.
And none of them were first-time ballots. At the last second, I added a 12th vote, and it is a first-time ballot member. But it's funny. I feel like you guys are at a really cool spot now in the show because a lot of the big guns are in. And so now you really get into the debate about who deserves, who doesn't deserve. To Mike's point, like, who do you not want to see fall off? I think last year I was on a roundtable and I mentioned I was playing like prevent defense. And I was giving people votes that I wanted to see not fall off and not giving people votes that I thought were going to get enough votes in. And now that people are entering their 3rd and 4th years, it's something I worry about. People I think really need to get in, and I worry they're going to fall off. So
right.
My numbers are low.
Okay. And so are you with sports? Is that your mindset too, as far as like you have to be elite to be first ballot? Like, do you hold the first ballot thing in high regard?
That's a great analogy. Like, is this person a first ballot Hall of Famer? There's a big difference between an all-star, a Hall of Famer, and a first ballot Hall of Famer. And to that point, when I looked at this list, how many people on this list were equal to somebody like a John Belushi, Dana Carvey, Steve Martin, people who made it on their first ballots. I do weigh that and judge that. I did when I made my votes.
I always find that interesting because I'm generally, if they're a Hall of Famer, they're a Hall of Famer, so it doesn't matter what ballot, but I can see the separation, the distinction between first ballot and not in some people's minds. Bill, I know you love baseball. Are you a first ballot kind of guy, or?
Completely 100% with Brad on that. I think I took a little bit of flack the first roundtable we did that I left James Downey off because of his last 10 years on the show and how much he had fallen off the cliff. And not that he should never be in or anything to that, but and I get how big he is, but it was too much to ask to put him on the first ballot for me. So I think there is that separation. And that's also in your mind as well. That's subjective based on the fan. So it'll be interesting to see how much we all match up.
Yeah, I'm interested. And Jim Downey is still on the ballot as a writer. Before we get into your selections, I'm going to go through the nominees for the listeners, and then we'll reveal your ballots. So we have 34 nominees on the ballot this year. As far as cast members go, we have 9. First-timers include Fred Armisen, Vanessa Bayer, Anna Gasteyer, Daryl Hammond, Chris Parnell, and Jason Sudeikis. And returning to the ballot, Jan Hooks, Maya Rudolph, and Molly Shannon. For hosts, we have 10 hosts on the ballot, a couple first-timers in Jim Carrey and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Returning to the ballot, Candice Bergen, Buck Henry, Scarlett Johansson, Melissa McCarthy, John Mulaney, Paul Rudd, Emma Stone, and Justin Timberlake. The Emma Stone's interesting. She's hosting. As of this recording, she hasn't hosted yet, but she'll have hosted a fifth time by the time we release this. So that's an interesting name there on the ballot. So for musical guests, we have 6 musical guests. First-timers, David Bowie and Lady Gaga. Returning, Dave Grohl, Paul McCartney, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Prince. And in the writing category, which I'd like to see more love to the writing category, just overall, just selfishly. First-timers, we have Rosie Schuster and Adam McKay. Returning to the ballot, the aforementioned Jim Downey. We have Franken Davis, Jack Handy, Michael O'Donoghue, Paula Pell, and Herb Sargent. And in the producer category, Dick Ebersol is on the ballot. So that's your 34. All right, time to reveal some ballots. So I want to start with the newcomer here, Mike Murray. So we want to reveal your first on your ballot, however you want to do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a ranking, just whoever you feel like revealing and talking about right now.
I would love to go first, and I would love to pick this individual first. Someone I was very disappointed to see wasn't in yet, but honored that I could be a part of getting them in. And that is first head writer, first person to deliver a line in SNL history. It's Michael O'Donoghue with my first pick.
All right, Michael O'Donoghue, controversial Michael O'Donoghue. Maybe he rubs a lot of voters the wrong way a little bit. Like, Mike, why, make your case a little bit for Michael O'Donoghue here.
Well, this is something that I kind of made a few notes about what I would consider to be a Hall of Famer. And a big thing that I put some weight into is just heavily influencing the fabric of SNL. And I'm thinking about 1975, October 11th, this show on television. No one knows what they're about to see. It could have been a clean show. It could have been a very blue show. It could have been anything. It could have been all Muppets. It could have been anything. And I feel like his style as a satirist and being this kind of edgy and sardonic flavor, this whole thing set the framework for the show. And we can get into sketches and things that he contributed, specifically. But for that alone, I think he is more than qualified to be an SNL Hall of Famer. And I also, like sports, put a lot of investment into being a founder. So that as well.
Yeah, Bill, what do you have to say about what Mike said? And is Michael O'Donoghue on your ballot?
He definitely is. He definitely deserves to be in. We still talk to this day on modern SNL about the show taking risks, stepping out of the box, doing something different. he did that. He personified that. Was he over the top sometimes? Yes. Did he go too far? Maybe. But he wrote some of the greatest sketches in SNL history. And his persona, when he would appear on the show as Mr. Mike, is some of my favorite stuff from that era, when he would go on the stage and talk about plunging steel needles into his eyes as Mike Douglas. Still makes me laugh. I don't think that's aged badly at all. You probably couldn't do that today because somebody would be offended and go on Twitter and complain. But this is what you want from a writer, from a comedic writer. You don't want safe, you don't want formulaic, and he provided that. So he is definitely on my ballot.
And Brad, you and Gary were my guests for Michael O'Donoghue. Are you going to shock the world and leave him off your ballot?
No. He's at the top of mine or near the top. To what Mike and Bill both said, and not even his individual sketches, which I agree with Bill. Some of the stuff he wrote are some of the best sketches of all time. But it's more the legacy and what he meant to that show starting out those first 3 seasons. He was the first head writer. I don't think you can give that enough credit for season 1. You know, we talked about when we fought for him and on his episode, you know, I think there's 4 people that you really have to attribute the success of Saturday Night Live season 1 for. And remember, Saturday Night Live was not a hit when it first started. It wasn't a guaranteed show, so it was a very rocky road. It could have failed, and I feel like there's 4 people who are really responsible for it surviving and being successful that first season. One is Chevy, the other's Lorne, Davey Wilson, the director, and the 4th is Michael O'Donoghue, the head writer. And if it wasn't stuff he specifically wrote, he was really leading the ship as to what this voice of this new show is going to be. You see his influence on Alan Zweibel. You see his influence on early Franken and Davis. His fingerprint is everywhere on that show. And I don't think it's overstating it when I said it on our episode where without Michael O'Donoghue, there's a very good chance Saturday Night Live does not see a second season. And I think you have to reward that. And it's a sin it's taken 4 votes to get him in.
Well, I think that's a good point. I've had to warm up to O'Donoghue's candidacy over the years a little bit. I think, Brad, you and Gary helped me understand or I guess kind of do some soul searching as far as how important he actually was to the show. And it wasn't all just shock value, even though some of that was funny, but a lot of it was, he wrote a lot of really clever, more quote unquote straight sketches too. Yeah. But he's going to have a uphill battle to climb. So,
I think he has an uphill battle for 2 reasons, and it's a bummer. One, I think is the age. It's just he's so old, and a lot of people don't know who he is or don't really remember or know. And the second is what they do know of him is not as a writer, but as the on-camera, as the Mr. Mike, which Bill said he likes it, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people are put off by him and his danger and edginess and all that. And I think those 2 things are really going to hurt his candidacy as a writer, which is what he's being nominated for, should be a shoo-in.
Yeah. Well, he received 11.1% of the vote after season 3. Bill's shaking his head, and I think that deserves a head shake as well. I can see maybe him not being in, but that's criminally low, I think, for Michael O'Donoghue. So let's get those numbers up. I think he'll get more this round. Will it be enough to make it? I don't know. So all 3 of our panelists have Michael O'Donoghue on their ballot. Brad, I want you to share your first choice, who you want to talk about.
Well, after Michael O'Donoghue, I think there's a second candidate that is a sin that they're not in the Hall of Fame, but I know somebody else wants to talk about it, so I don't want to steal that thunder. I'm going to go with James Downey as my first pick. This is another one. When he came up in season 1 and didn't make it, I was flabbergasted, almost to the point I actually wrote into Jamie, and I'm like, what happened? How did he not get on in the Hall of Fame? James Downey comes in season 1. He's there for so many years. He does a stint as head writer. His fingerprint is on generations of cast and sketches, and he just did so much for the longevity and the vibe and the feel of this show that it's another one where I just feel like I don't know how you don't put him in.
Well, you should ask Bill, because Bill, you said you didn't vote for Jim Downey. Maybe the first ballot have you softened on that a little bit?
I absolutely did. Yes. No, like I said, I have a lot of problems with the way his tenure ended. And you can attribute this to athletes as well. If someone stays around too long, if you see Willie Mays stumbling around at Shea Stadium as a Met, does that ruin their legacy? And I think it ruined his just a bit. He stayed on way too long. He was writing 12-minute cold opens that were not funny, that were not biting, that were not sharp. That said, you cannot overstate how important he was to the show. If you like politics at all, I give him full credit for getting me into politics because of what he did in 86, 88. The 88 Republican debate where Dan Aykroyd does a cameo, still one of my favorite sketches. Obviously, the Bush-Gore stuff. I mean, you can just go on. And it's not just politics. I mean, he wrote so many great things with the show. Obviously, the Norm Weekend Update stuff. He is definitely a Hall of Famer for sure. He is one of the founders of the show as well. So definitely has to be in and is on my ballot.
Yeah, Mike, are we 3 for 3?
We're 3 for 3. Jim Downey was second on my list after O'Donoghue of people that have to get in my opinion. So a lot of it's been said by Brad and Bill, but I'm a huge Norm Update guy. He's my favorite of all time. And if you'd never heard of Jim Downey and you were just told that how much emphasis Norm put on him when he was being fired and like, they basically one didn't want to do without the other, and just how integral he was to Norm's Update tenure. So if you are a fan of that, you have to give a ton of credit to Downey behind the scenes, off camera, as well as Norm, on stage, on camera. So for that alone, that gives him a ton. And yeah, we mentioned the Lockbox Strategery cold open season 26. Brad mentioned the multiple stints. And shout out to the SNL digital short of Andy's dad. It has to be the best writer cameo of all time, because if you didn't know who Jim Downey was, you would just think he's just some guy. But the fact that it was Jim Downey made that sketch an all-timer for me. So I'm a huge Downey fan. From Billy Madison, one of the best monologues in movie history. Also, he was a cast member, sketch writer. So in season 5, when they brought the writers in, so he should get some credit for that too.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not necessarily sharing my entire ballot or whatever, but he's one of 7 that I had as a lock, an absolute stone cold lock. So I definitely agree with this. Hopefully this is a good indication of maybe the writers getting some love. We have all 3 of you putting in Downey and Michael O'Donoghue. So hopefully this is like the way that the voters at large are thinking. So yeah, we'll see. So Bill, I want to go again to you. Do you have a cast member? Let's hear a cast member from you if you got one.
Do you think I do, Thomas?
No.
Well, I mean, if you know me, you know who I'm going with here. I did a great conversation with you last year about that, and obviously I'm going with the undeniably great Jan Hooks, probably the most underrated cast member in the history of the show, judging on how she's not in the Hall of Fame at this point. It's ludicrous. She was one of the first great female comedians on the show. Obviously, we had the original 3 of Gilda, Jane, and Lorraine. But then, as I've discussed, we have 5 or 6 years where very talented women are on this show and get no play. You have Julia Louis-Dreyfus, you have Mary Gross and Robin Duke and Gail Mathias. None of them, they're all the housewives in the background. They don't have anything to say. They have very few sketches that you can point to. And then Jan comes in with this all-time golden era cast with Phil and Dana and the rest. And she shines all on her own. I'm rewatching season 12 right now because it's kind of my comfort food to go back and watch that every couple years. She's amazing. She has obviously the Sweeney sisters, all the stuff that she does with Phil, like the Love is a Dream, Marge Keister, her impression of Betty Davis. Thomas, you and I have talked about Dee Kelly, which no one remembers but you and I think, with Attitudes. And of course, Hillary, who she would come back as a special guest. And she came back as a special guest 9 times after she left. When we were discussing her on the greatest cast members of all time, there's only two other people, I think, Don Novella and Dan Aykroyd. I think we figured that were credited in the opening credits as a special guest, a former cast member. So amazing career. Obviously, back then it was only 5 years, 6 years for somebody. She was on for 5, but one of the best of all time.
Yeah, you and I gushed about her in season 3, so I urge people to go back and listen to that one. That was a fun episode. Brad or Mike, do either of you have Jan Hooks?
I do. I have Jan Hooks on my ballot, and if only I could share my screen with my Jan Hooks notes. Take my word for it, but my number one note is defer to Bill Kay. It's my number one note.
We cleared the way for Bill for that one. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, she's easily on my Mount Rushmore of women in SNL. So if you took the two Mount Rushmores of male and female cast members, you would have to say, well, all 8 of them have to be in the Hall of Fame. Jan Hooks is not, so she's got to be in now. In with John Lovitz, Phil Hartman, Dana. I think she elevated them. She made them better. Her supporting work, when it was supporting work and utility play, was just as impressive to me as when she was, doing Sweeney Sisters with Nora Dunn and things like that. So Jan Hooks, easy vote for me.
Yeah, Brad, is she one of the people who you wanted to get into the Hall before she's not on the ballot anymore?
No, she's one of the people I couldn't believe wasn't in on the first time. This is who I was referencing, if you haven't picked up on it. When I knew Bill wanted. I love the conversation you guys had. I loved the episode, Bill, you guys did on the countdown, where you everything you guys said in both those instances was spot on. She's an amazing actress, an amazing comedian. She does impressions. She does characters. I think she's part of one of the best, if not best, overall cast of all time. You got to give a little bit of credit to what that cast means to the show, what they did for the show, and where they got that show to from when they started with, her and Dana and Mike and Kevin Nealon and Phil Hartman and Lovitz and Miller. It's just she's an integral part of that, and it just baffles me. It baffles me we're talking about her again.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm going to use another sports term, usage rate, and I think her usage rate would have been higher in a less stacked cast. So yeah, I think that has to be factored in too. So you have people like Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey, where I think they took a lot of reps that maybe somebody like an amazing performer like Jan possibly could have taken in maybe a lesser era of SNL. So I think that has to be factored in as well. Mike, I want to go back to you. Who's the next person you'd like to talk about?
Do you want to? Should I go cast, host? Any
Let's
preference?
Go host.
Okay, host. That's easy for me. And I listened to the great episode today with my friend John Schneider on it about Buck Henry. So we're getting the easy ones out of the way right now. So we haven't fought each other yet. But I thought Buck Henry, and another one that, of course, that kind of legacy thing, I feel like a lot of people might not be familiar with him, even on name recognition alone, let alone his work on SNL or work outside of SNL. So great episode that you guys did. Please check it out if you haven't. And like John pointed out, first host to appear on Update. And you guys talked about his work with the Jim Belushi Samurai. So talking to an old head of SNL, you talk about that sketch. And Buck Henry had some great work there. And I thought he just kind of established a template for what the host duties are and can be. He hosted the finales, and so I think Buck Henry is the first. He was the 10-time host, right? So, someone who's hosted 10 plus times, you could argue stats alone that they should get in. But if you really get into his episodes, it's just classic SNL. So that for me, I'm a big sucker for that. So throwing on a Buck Henry episode, not every sketch is going to hit, but when he's on, he's on. So Buck Henry for me is my host submission tonight.
Yeah, that's a great one. Brad, you and Gary, your podcast deals with the first 5 seasons of SNL. So you're in the midst of just appreciating, I think it sounds like, Buck's legacy and his hosting chops. Give it to us. You make us proud. You're putting him in?
100%. Another one. Definitely needs to be in. Mike mentioned, he's hosted 10 times. He did it in 5 years. This guy made the 5 Timers Club before it was a thing by season 3. And stats aside, he was a great host in that he did 2 things great. One, he brought the cast together and brought them to elevate their game. And you could see when you watch a Buck Henry episode, all of the cast is bringing their A game. He could also elevate stuff. So if you got some writing materials from sketches that just weren't the best or weren't the greatest, you could see Buck lifting it up. And you knew that if you brought a sketch that week to Buck Henry, he could add something to it. He could give it to you. It's not a host who just comes in and says, tell me what you guys have. I'll do what you want me to do. He had a voice. He would do things. He's, I think, the first host. I'm pretty sure he's the first host to have his own reoccurring character. And he has several between Samurai with John and Nerds and Uncle Roy later on. But he himself as a host would have his own recurring characters. And what he gave the show so early on was a lot of credibility. A guy of his stature and his abilities. And like Mike said, you might not always get the best episode with Buck Henry, but you're going to enjoy it. It's always good, and you're always getting good stuff.
What these guys have said, the same. I mean, he's on my ballot, of course. Yeah, I mean, there's very few hosts in the history of the show that you could point to that you knew you were going to get a good show, no matter what. There's plenty of five-timers, but there's plenty of duds in those five-timers, at least in episodes. So I think he brought so much to the show. I think he loses something from modern audiences because he decided to hang it up after the fifth. He left with the original cast, never came back, didn't do what Steve Martin did. And I think that hurts him legacy-wise for younger viewers, unfairly. He is so important to the history of the show. And he really hosted 11, if we're being fair, because he was the host of the Anyone Can Host show, let's be honest. So, I mean, anytime Buck comes on the screen, I'm happy. Uncle Roy, what can you say? I mean, the shower mic, which was Billy's breakout sketch
that was great.
With Gilda. And then he was in all the classics. He was in Coneheads. He was in Olympia Diner, Nick the Lounge Singer. So there's so much there. He definitely deserves to be in.
I just want to add one more thing to what Bill said. You know, Buck did come back once after those 5 seasons, and it is probably one of my favorite moments of all time. It's at the 15th anniversary show, and you got to remember, this is the time when SNL doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't know it's doing 50 years. It's their first anniversary special, and this is the first time you saw Buck Henry on the stage since the end of season 5. And he comes out, he's like, hi, I'm Buck Henry, covering for Steve Martin, because Steve Martin was stage fright or whatever and couldn't perform live in front of a crowd. And Buck Henry comes out and says, oh, hi, I'm Buck Henry. And that place goes nuts. And it's just such a great moment. And they also make a bunch of Buck Henry jokes that night, which was really great. And if you look at it in the context of this might be the only anniversary show SNL ever did, they really went back and made sure they made a point to point out Buck Henry. And I think you got to take note of that too.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Bill, I actually want to go back to you to even the numbers out a little bit. You have a few more left on your ballot than the other two. I want you to give me one that you might think is more of a curveball, possibly like that maybe Brad or Mike don't have on their ballot.
Well, I don't know. With these heavyweights on the panel, I don't know. I think they'll probably have a lot. We'll see.
Basically, I'm saying everybody's being too nice and agreeable right now.
Bill, just nominate somebody after 1997, and you'll probably throw me a curveball.
There we go.
So I'm going to nominate Louis C.K. and no. Too soon? Okay. If we're going to do that, I'm going to say Adam McKay. So he comes onto the show after season 20, the infamous season 20. And he comes in with this new cast, the cast that we love with Will Ferrell and Sherry O'Terry. And within a year, he's promoted to head writer. And he had so many great pieces. Obviously, we know what he did after his career with Anchorman and Talladega Nights and things like that. But while he was on the show, some of the classics that he did, like Wake Up and Smile, he was responsible for a lot of the Celebrity Jeopardies. Bill Brasky, which is an all-time sketch for me. Mr. Peepers, Love It or Hate It. And he also was involved with my best friend Robert Smigel in a lot of the TV Funhouse. He did a lot of the things with that. And he was the first digital short guy, not Lonely Island. So if you go back and watch, he did a lot of the Man on the Street pieces. And but he just had such a comic sensibility to him. he also was one of the best writers in the audience pieces that they did in the monologues at that time. He pretty much played the same character every time. I think it was Keith, where they would cut to him and he would just give the host a hard time. So I love Adam McKay.
Keith from the audience. I love it.
Yeah. So
Only Bill Kenney.
So I think, his legacy after the show, obviously that's not going into this, but it's important because he made so many great movies, so many comedic movies of the mid-aughts, and his 6 years on the show were fantastic. So I'm going with Adam McKay.
Mike or Brad, do either of you have Adam McKay? No. Brad, why do you hate Adam McKay?
Jesus, Thomas.
It's my job to ask tough questions.
No, back to what I kind of said at the top, I don't think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Also, when we get to the end of my ballot, it is almost 50% writers, and those are 50% writers who I feel like need to get in the Hall of Fame before Adam McKay gets in. So I don't dislike Adam McKay. I don't think he's not worthy, but there's people that I think need to get in before he gets in.
And Mike doesn't have Adam McKay.
I don't, and
because you hate him. Just say you hate him, Mike. Move on.
I mean, literally, I could have just rewind and play what Brad said. I do, when we asked at the top, Thomas, about the first ballot Hall of Famer, I do put a lot of weight into that because when we're, I'm hoping you're going to be doing this show in 10 years and you can list off first ballot Hall of Famers, and I feel like if you snuck Adam McKay in there, that might be, it wouldn't seem right to be like, Steve Martin, Phil Hartman, and Adam McKay.
Well, he's going to be on the ballot in 10 years with George Coe, so I think he'll have a good chance by then.
10 years, so you can last on the ballot for 10 years?
No, but I just like to talk about George Coe on the podcast whenever possible.
Me too. Let's do a George Coe podcast.
Yes, a special. Hey, I told you about the Don Pardo Award. Maybe George Coe. I don't know.
Don Pardo.
You are reaching, my friend.
Pride of Westfield, Mass. Don Pardo.
Absolutely.
But so same thing. I think the first ballot thing definitely threw me, especially when I was trying to keep my list at 10 and below, but I did exceed that. I think I have 2 first ballots on my list, and so this time around, Adam McKay was not one of them.
Let me push back a little bit on that.
Sure.
With the dire straits the show was in 1995, you cannot overstate how important good writing was to the show, because it was not necessarily Sandler and Farley and Myers not doing their job anymore. The writing fell off the cliff. And to bring a guy in who was pretty young at the time, in Adam McKay, and have him kind of write so many big pieces, along with somebody else who may come up a little bit later, was so vital to the show surviving. So we're sitting here right before season 50 to talk about it.
I think that's a valid point, and I urge anybody. I think the episode came out really well. Jeremy Dove was on with me to talk about Adam McKay, so I think Jeremy made a great case for him. Mike, you said you had 2 first ballots on your list. Who's one of them?
One of them, very easy for me, and again, I'll reiterate that first ballot Hall of Famer should be an honor. So it is my pleasure to say Jason Sudeikis, because he is top 5 cast members for me of all time. I might be a little biased, my high school cast, as we all say, we love our high school cast, but I think Jason Sudeikis could be in any cast. You could put him in the 70s, 80s, 90s, anywhere. I think his range was amazing. I mean, my notes on Sudeikis, top of the dome, could just say so many roles that I loved of him, of the devil, the cop in Scared Straight, Pete Twinkle and Greg Stink with Will Forte, even a niche one I'll throw for you. His Dane Cook MLB postseason 07 I would quote that for so long, and it was in one episode, but it made an impression. So, like I said, top 5 cast member for me, I have to put him in. So first ballot, I think Sudeikis is a first ballot, and I think recency bias could be a bad thing for Sudeikis because he is fairly recent, but I think he is up there with the greats. So Sudeikis was easy for me.
And Bill, you were my guest for Sudeikis, so I'm going to hold off. I'm going to let you kind of just sit on it real quick because I'm curious about Brad because you had mentioned something. If it's past 97, there might be a good chance. Does Sudeikis fit that?
Not on my ballot.
Okay.
I can't say anything bad about him. I mean, there's not many people that are on these ballots that you're going to say bad things or shouldn't be nominated. There's a few, don't get me wrong, but he's not one. I love Sudeikis. He's hilarious. I can't argue anything that Matt said. I probably won't argue anything that Bill said. I look at it of people that I feel overall history need to get in and are on their third and fourths and they're struggling with their vote percentage. Sudeikis I know is going to get votes. So I'm not giving him a vote because I want to give my vote to somebody I'm worried might fall off the ballot that I think needs to get in at some point.
Okay, Bill is seething right now. I can see it in his eyes. What do you think, Bill?
Don't lie to those audio listeners, Thomas. No, I'm not. I respect that. That's some strategery there by Brad. So I have to put him in. I obviously, I was on with you. We had a wonderful conversation about him. I feel like, and we talked about this, there is a direct line from Phil to Will to Jason as far as the glue, the alpha male, the guy you go to in the cast when you just need that role filled. And he had so many great roles, a lot of them that Mike just mentioned. Obviously, John Bovey, the main justice as well. And he did a great Letterman, even though it was not as good as Norm's. And probably the best Biden, I don't know, out of the 77 that they've done on the show. It's probably up there for sure. I don't know. JJ and Mikey may want to have a word about that. But yeah, I mean, he's a no doubt Hall of Famer for me.
Yeah, he was one of the locks on my list too. I have him almost a top 10 cast member, and so that's really high praise. And I think Bill's has him around the same level as I do. So Brad, I'm curious about who's next on your ballot that you want to discuss.
Well, here's one along those lines of why I'm not voting for Sudeikis. I think he deserves to get in. I think he'll get in. The person I'm going to bring up next is someone who I don't think I voted for once or twice, but they deserve to get in. And at some point, Maya Rudolph. Maya Rudolph is somebody I think is a Hall of Fame member. Should be in. Wasn't her first ballot. She's now on her fourth, I believe. And it's like it's a combination of one, she needs to get in, and two, she better not fall off. So I did this, I think, with Lonely Island. I don't think I voted for them their first three times. Maya Rudolph, she's great. I mean, she, again, another one, does great characters, amazing impressions. She commits so much to almost everything she does. It's very hard to watch a sketch with Maya Rudolph and not enjoy it. She's one of those great cast members that can sing and has a bunch of different skills in her toolbox. She's just all around. I know on the SNN they mentioned, built for sketch comedy, or came out of the factory for a sketch comedy show. Maya Rudolph, that's her.
Yeah, Mike, is Maya on your ballot?
Well, we've come to this, probably my most controversial non-vote right here. And, maybe Brad can convince me because I have some empty slots. And I guess I didn't realize that she was on the very first ballot because I'm looking at your numbers, Thomas. And, she has increased every year. So that should bode well for her getting in the Hall of Fame. When I was looking at, though, I again, to reiterate, was just thinking about people who I thought were in danger. And I just never thought she was in danger, but I guess did not get in the first time. Mm-hmm. And I guess now that I've grown up and looked back at those seasons, I don't think they've aged as well as I hoped they would. And I think that's tarnished in my head the Tina, Jimmy, Maya, Horatio, Parnell era, because when I was pretty young when it was on, but I was watching weekly at that time. And looking back, I'm not as high in those episodes. I think Maya as a performer is undoubtedly so talented. So in this time, if I had a few votes, Maya would certainly be in there, just not in this time. And maybe I can be persuaded.
I have my retort, if I may, Thomas.
Yeah, please.
So, Mike, you don't like that era, or say those sketches, or that of SNL, correct?
I mean, well, any era, there's good and bad, yeah.
So if you had a horrible baseball team, but you had an all-star Hall of Fame player on a shitty team, would that warrant them not getting voted in because they got stuck on a crappy team?
Of course not, but I also don't think it was a crappy team. I just think that when I've definitely I don't want to use the word soured, but I've definitely have reassessed it in recent years and doing a lot of SNL coverage.
Yeah, I think that might be the case for a lot of people. So Maya in season 1 got 47% of the vote, up to 57.9, and then gradually a little bump to 58.3. I have a feeling she'll get in, but maybe not. I've heard that sentiment, Mike, from a few people that perhaps maybe Maya, her reputation doesn't quite equal like the output that was actually on the show. Like, Bill, what would you say to that line of thinking?
Yeah, with Mike, the ultimate stats guy, I'll be interested when he gets back to those seasons to see where she falls. She's not on my ballot. She's fairly low on my ballot, if I'm being honest. I love Maya. I love seeing her come back to the show. I love everything she's done since, but she doesn't have enough character work to me. She doesn't have a lot of original characters that stand up, and her impressions, her Oprah was pretty good. I think her Beyonce is overrated. So I don't think she's there. Now, will she get in? Probably, because she's more recent. She's still in the pop culture realm. She's come back to the show as obviously as Kamala, and yeah, she's just not there for me. And a lot of what Mike said as far as that era, and it's not because it was shitty seasons. I think there's a lot of good there, but there's a lot of stuff that I just don't think is very funny anymore.
Okay, yeah, and again, I think Maya will at some point get in. She's always like, she pops up in shows. She comes back to SNL, and people love her. So she's one of those performers that I'm always fascinated by. She's almost like a Rorschach test in a way for viewers as far as what you value in a performer and how you view someone's legacy. So Maya is always one of the more interesting people on this ballot for me. Bill, I want to go back to you. Who's next that you want to talk about?
Well, here's somebody who definitely should get in based on so many different things. Longevity, character work, his impressions are phenomenal. Of course, I'm talking about the great Darrell Hammond. He was on for 14 seasons, which was unheard of, unthinkable in the 90s and the early 2000s. His Clinton is something that he's done across 20 seasons, and still, for him to come in, a lot of the impressions that he did, he was taking over for the unbelievably great Phil Hartman, and he still found his own way to do it. The Donahues, the Clintons, things like that. And even though you can say his last couple seasons are not great, did he stay too long? Probably. But there's enough there that he built up in those 14 years. He was the go-to guy for so many different things. So I'm putting Darrell Hammond in.
Yeah, and I think Darrell is such an all-time cast member. Mike, is Darrell on your ballot?
Darrell is on my ballot as a first ballot Hall of Famer, so I don't feel as high on Darrell as an overall body of work as I do Sudeikis. But I think with over 100 impressions on SNL, I know that's a volume stat because he was there 14 years, so he had plenty of opportunity to do so. But I think that it would be, I'd be a little derelict in my duty to not give him a vote because of the impact in the so many eras. And you again, a guy you could fit anywhere, because I don't think we look at Darrell as being ever like that crazy or zany. But he could do that for sure. But with the impressions and leading cold opens, just Mr. Reliable. And I love guys like that on SNL who are just Mr. Reliable. The lights flashing, they're counting down, cold open. Darrell Hammond's there doing O'Donnell or doing a president from the White House, from the Oval Office, things like that. So I think Darrell Hammond, if the SNL Hall of Fame is an institution, then Darrell Hammond should be in that institution for me. So he's my other first ballot guy.
Yeah, and Brad, I have no doubts that you have respect for Darrell, but does that mean that he's on your ballot? Is he going to wait?
Darrell Hammond is my lone first ballot write-in. Yep. Everything these guys said. Mr. Reliable, the guy you can count on. His like batting average, if you will, it's got to be high. You could always count on him. You knew you were getting good laughs. I think even in his later seasons, I enjoyed him. I don't think we mentioned the Connery impression, which is one of the most iconic he's done, which to me is one of the funniest. Yeah, this is just, in the vein, like Bill said, kind of in the vein of a Phil Hartman. You could count on him. He held the cast together. You could rely on it if you needed it. Yes, this is to me a guy who's worthy of a first ballot.
That's great news. I love Daryl. 3 for 3. Brad gives his he signs that away. That's awesome. Daryl, on my personal ballot, he's one of the 7 locks that I have coming in for me personally. I have Daryl as a top 20 cast member, an all-time great impressionist. So definitely, I think Daryl will probably get in. It's my best guess is he'll get in on the first ballot. Maybe not, but I think he should. So wonderful. Everybody has Daryl Hammond. Mike, I'm curious, who do you want to talk about next?
I want to switch gears, and I'm going to refer Thomas again to the stats that you provided with us, and someone that I think would be a little bit of a cloud of shame on this great institution. Wipe your shoes off, but we don't have Candy Bergen in the Hall of Fame, so you don't want to turn back around. So I have to put Candice Bergen in there as the first woman to host the show. She hosted a second time in season 1. Crazy. I mean, we talked about Buck Henry doing his all his hosting in such a short period of time. Candice Bergen turned around like, I'll see you next season. Season 2? No, next season I'll be here. So I have to put Candice Bergen in. When she shows back up at the show, I like similar to like Elliot Gould, someone like that, I get really giddy and excited to see her back. She was also in the first ever Land Shark sketch. I want to shout out to the Land Shark. And so the legacy and impact of her on the show, I think has to be talked about. And someone that her numbers are really low for the previous ballots, and that worried me. So I had to immediately throw a vote on her name.
Yeah, Candy, she was first on the ballot in season 2. She got 15.2%, up to 17.3%, but yeah, comically low. The show loved her. She hosted a couple times in the show's infancy in season 1, so Lauren obviously loved her. If Lauren looked at this ballot, he'd probably be like, "Oh, Thomas, why isn't Candy Bergen in the SNL Hall of Fame?" So,
way to slide that impression in there, Thomas. Seamlessly.
Thanks. Yeah. Brad, other than my bad Lauren impression, what do you think of Candy?
Well, I love Candice Bergen, but she's not on my ballot. And I have some opening spots if anybody can convince me otherwise. She hosts 3 times in those early years pretty quickly, and then disappears for about a decade from the show, which we actually talked about in one of our episodes coming out soon, her 3rd episode. And of those 3 episodes, one of the 3 is really bad. But this was a tough one for me. Like I did go back and forth on it, and I think I may have even had her on the ballot last year. I don't know. There's just something about it. When I looked at the other hosts that are getting in the overall numbers, and I do worry that her numbers could fall off. So I did go back and forth on this a lot. But when I looked at the overall body of work, and I want to give credit because of the first woman 5-timer, and that's important. So I don't know. I don't have a good defense as to why she's not in, so I could be easily turned.
Bill, we loved when Candy hosted the show. What do you think?
When Candy came in to host, it was really the first time our show found its voice. Listen. Every time, every Christmas time, I go back and watch her classic episodes. She was in one of the greatest Christmas episodes of all time, with Consumer Probe and Killer Trees, Adopt Belushi for Christmas. She was great, and you can't overstate how important at that time to have a female host come in and to have her come back so quickly. It's just amazing. Now, does she lose some points? Again, because it's been so long, because her 2 87-90 episodes aren't the best.
There was a classic in her 87 episode, though. What maybe be the Anne Boleyn sketch. It was maybe one of my favorite from that era. She was great in that.
That's fair. Yeah. But the fact that she never really came back, I mean, she's been back for a few of the Five-Timer sketches over the years. But yeah, I wonder if that hurts her. But she is on my ballot. This is one of those situations where she has to stay on this ballot. She's important to the history of the show and for womankind. So I'm all about propping up our female counterparts.
Yes, wonderful. So we're 2 for 3 here on Candace Bergen. Bill, I'm curious who's next that you would like to talk about.
Let's talk about, we haven't touched on musical guests, and this is always a dicey area. And we've talked about it on roundtables before. The standard is so high, but there's somebody on here who definitely has to get in. Was recently on the show a couple weeks ago. And of course, I'm talking about Dave Grohl.
Yes.
I mean, this guy, what he has done over the course of 30 years. He started with Nirvana, of course, was on season 17, and has come back 12 times. Of course, he's been in a lot of sketches. He's been with 3 different bands. And I mean, my thing with musical guests, this is the same I feel when I go to a concert. Play the hits. And that hurts other people that are on this very ballot to me. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to come on and play what we know, let me give you some of the stuff. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Heart-Shaped Box, For All the Cows, Learn to Fly, All My Life, Times Like These. These are all-time bangers, and he's done them all. So Dave Grohl has to be in any Hall of Fame that involves SNL.
I love that somebody said Dave Grohl. He's one of my 7 locks for me personally. He's times like these back in after they announced Biden got elected and all that. That's like that still gives me chills. Like them performing times like these at night. Like that's like one of the more chill-inducing performances I've ever seen on SNL. So I'm all aboard. I was going to ask you guys about musical guests. To me, Dave Grohl, like Mike, like analytics-wise and numbers-wise, like there's not a musical guest in the show's history that reaches the level of Dave Grohl. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, 12-timer, 31-year span, 3 different groups. He's also was with Mick Jagger for his famous episode, the Kristen Wiig final episode. And if you talk about music in general, there's probably a few people who have the respect of like different genres and age groups as Dave Grohl. But in SNL alone, I mean, yeah, this is a dicey subject because the criteria might not be as clear, but I think for Dave Grohl, he checks every box. So if he's not in, then I don't really know who will be.
Yep.
Because, I mean, I'm looking at the list of musical guests, and they're all people that I'm personally a fan of and listen to often. And Dave Grohl, I think, Thomas, the first time I ever heard your silky smooth voice, were you talking about Nirvana?
Yes, I was on season 1 with Jamie, and I was the guest for Nirvana, who's off the ballot, but I think that was a good thing because then I told Jamie, let's put Dave Grohl, let's not put Dave Grohl on the ballot because he has such a strong case.
Right, so all right, I'm glad my memory serves me well because the first time I ever heard the name Thomas Senna was that day when that episode dropped in the early SNL Hall of Fame days. That would have been really embarrassing if I messed that one up.
No, yeah. So Dave's on your ballot?
So
then,
Dave
Mike?
is on my ballot.
Awesome. Yeah, what do you think, Brad? Make me proud.
Dave Grohl is my lone musical guest
Awesome.
on my ballot this year.
I love this panel.
Real quick, not that I'm second guessing either of these two guys who know more probably the total history of the show, but wasn't he in 4 bands on the show?
Yeah, well, he was in them Crooked Vultures, Nirvana, Foo Fighters,
and he played with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
He played with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Yeah.
If you count it.
Yeah, I was counting just bands he was a member of, but that's such
fair.
a good point.
Yeah. So 3 bands he was a member of.
Tom Petty's doing Saturday Night Live. He's like, shit, I need a drummer. I'm going to call Dave Grohl.
Yeah. Well, Tom wanted Dave Grohl to then be part of the band and touring band and stuff afterward, but Dave didn't do it. So it was close.
And this is somebody, I don't think I voted for Dave Grohl before, but I mean, and you know what? The fact that he was just on definitely did sway my vote, that he's still relevant. He's still kicking it. He's still important when he's on the show. And that's what really kind of, I think, put me over the edge, is the fact that he was on so recent and did such a great job.
Yeah, he got 54% of the vote in season 3. I think there is a path for Dave Grohl to get in. And Mike brought up a good point. I mean, you look at the musical guests, like if not, well, Paul Simon's already in. But if not Dave Grohl for the rest of them, then who? If like Dave Grohl to me seems like the obvious one. He was one of my locks. So 3 for 3 here on your ballots. That makes me super happy. You've done me proud. I knew there's a reason why I invited you 3 here on on the panel. Dave Grohl, if you can tell, is probably the most passionate I am about any person on this ballot as far as getting into the hall. So let's go to Mike. What do you got for us?
All right. Well, I think we've been bouncing around, which I like, but I'm gonna go with another writer. My list, like Brad's and possibly Bill's, was very writer heavy, just because if people like us who are really nerdy about SNL aren't propping these people up, then who will? So I'm gonna go with Jack Handy. There's so much to talk about and who he wrote for. So his roster was so deep. So, which I'm sure any writer would love to claim, because you write decent, good, great material. It's hopefully most of it will become great material. And, of course, we're going to talk about deep thoughts that happened 80 times on the show. So, again, like Dave Grohl, if he's not in, then who is? To be a writer on that staff during that era, and, it was a decently long era that he was there, but to have your own little corner of SNL, I know it's so brief. It's so he was such a surrealist guy, an unfrozen caveman lawyer, fuzzy memories. Toons is the cat, if you're into that. He was introduced to Lorne by Steve Martin, so he's brought by one of an existing Hall of Famer. So for me, Jack Handy is somebody that I think people should know about more if they don't already. And if you've heard of him, then look into his work. And also, I like people in Hall of Fames to have some lore. And Jack Handy definitely has some SNL lore behind him, because he was a little mysterious, and people would say he was staying up late, finishing sketches on the typewriter, and he would just hand in fully written sketches, and that was like the Jack Handy thing. So it was an easy one for me, because I did start with writers, and then when I finished my full ballot, I looked back at Thomas's numbers. And I'm like, all right, he's got to get in now. So Jack Handy for me.
Yeah, to borrow from the hip hop world, Jack Handy is your favorite writer's favorite writer, essentially. Like, that's kind of what he is. And yeah, he has a distinct voice, Bill. Like Jack Handy, it's a Jack Handy sketch.
Yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer. He was on the fence for me only because of the tactic that Brad talks about with, is he safe? Is he still trajectorying upwards? But yeah, I don't think enough people know him outside of our nerddom, and other obviously fuzzy memories and things like that are still something that's seen. But yeah, he has to go in. You talk to anyone from the show, including my best friend Robert Smigel, they credit Handy for a lot. And I mean, you're talking about a heavy hitting lineup of writers in the late 80s with Smigel and Conan and Greg Daniels. To a person, they all point to Jack Handy as quintessential SNL writing, so he has to go in.
Yeah, agreed on all counts. Brad, what do you think of Mr. Jack Handy?
Oh, he's definitely on mine. And I think maybe I'm just giving him too much credit, but I feel like he's one of those writers that even if you, like Mike said, one of the big SNL nerds that you know who he is, I feel like he is a writer who, if you're at least one step deeper than a casual fan, you know Jack Handy. He does have that voice that's so unique, but also he's one of the few writers on that show who got his own piece. You knew his name, Deep Thoughts with Jack Handy. There's very few people that were getting spotlighted like that throughout the history of the show. And he just contributed to so many writers, and he has a decent tenure. And I love Mike's point about the lore. So yeah, I 100% think Jack Handy needs to get in.
Yeah, Handy is one of my 7 locks that I've referred to on my ballot. Jack Handy's one of them. His numbers, actually, even though he's not in the hall, I'm actually pleasantly surprised by his voting numbers. He got 46.8 in season 2, 52.1 in the last voting cycle. That's honestly a lot more than I would have expected. So there is a lot of recognition for Jack Handy and appreciation. So that makes me happy. Let's get Jack Handey in the SNL Hall of Fame. Bill, by my count, you have 5 left on your ballot. So why don't you share one of those with us?
I was told there'd be no math. Yes, I'm sticking with the writers here. I have so many writers on my ballot because it's just so important to get these people in. And I'm going to go with Paula Pell. Very important part of the show for 18 years. I was head writer for 2 of those. And if you liked the Will Ferrell era SNL, you like Paula Pell because she was a part of Cheerleaders, The Culps, Debbie Downer, for better or worse, Gilly, all the Justin Timberlake, like the Omeletteville and the Homelessville, Tony Bennett show when Alec would come on and host. She has a unique voice, and I think that that's very important, and we also need the representation of these amazing female writers in this hall, along with Tina Fey at that time, how important she was to getting new voices onto the show. So I'm going with Paula.
Yeah, Paula Pell, a huge presence in basically like a era of SNL that damn near saved the show, coming off a tumultuous time in the mid-'90s. Paula Pell, definitely a huge part of that. Mike, Brad, do either of you have Paula on your ballot?
I do not. And again, this is another person who I do really like, and I think she's amazingly talented and love her work. And, it's funny, like listening to Bill's argument, it's a valid point because I think this is I think this is an instance of me voting scared because I got a bunch of more old white guys on my ballot that I'm worried are going to get off the ballot. And I think it's writers I want to see in before I see Paula Pell in. It's not that I don't like Paula Pell. There's just other people to me mean more. But Bill has a very good point. So I don't know. Now I'm torn a bit.
And you
got space, man.
Yeah, you do have space.
Go big.
Oh, wait till you hear my last pick because that's basically a trash pick anyway. So
I'm excited. Mike, do you have Paula Pell?
I do have PP on my ballot. Paula Pell's season 21 to 34. I mean, talk about the people who came in and out of 8H during her time. And I think it's important when assessing these things. And for the record, I am a fan of her writing. But I think when you think about these writers, is that something that you might find funny, someone else might not, and vice versa. So when a writer has a voice, like we talked about earlier, with other writers, and talked about at the top of the show, I mentioned Bowen Yang and his style, is when you can identify it, it's such more of a satisfying Hall of Fame pick for me. So for Paula Pell, and also Last Call with the Sheila Sauvage sketches, there were certain things that she contributed to the show. Paula, that is, not Sheila, but is you can just put your finger on. And I just think that when I'm looking at these writers, and again, my ballot is very writer heavy, I think it just makes sense to me. So I didn't think about it too much. There was definitely probably 10 names above her when I did my ballot, but I felt very comfortable with Paula Pell in the hall.
Brad, you have me curious now. I want to know what your curveball is.
Oh no, I'm saving
it.
I know I gotta save it because what's better than one old white guy writer than 2?
Okay, yeah, save it, but give us another one.
So I'm gonna go Franken and Davis.
Okay.
Again, writers old. If you haven't sensed a theme yet on my ballot. But I don't think I voted for them last time, and I remember that I was on when we talked about them last season's Roundtable. People had argued for. I was arguing you should treat them as Franken and Davis as one entity, and people were arguing against both the entity, but also Franken's contributions and Davis's contributions, and I think that does play a lot into it, as well as. And a lot of them are doing the research for O'Donoghue episode, Thomas, with you, is, so many people who dislike O'Donoghue and maybe the tone of the show O'Donoghue had at that point really owe a lot of credit to Franken and Davis, because they're the ones who kind of came in and kind of took over from him of what the show was, and less edgy and dark and more kind of, some people might say it's a bad thing as far as like more open to a broader audience. But those guys really were behind a lot of the creativity stuff, especially from seasons 3, 4, and 5. And then, you get into Franken almost took over the show after Lauren left and came back, and Davis left and came back. So I think these guys just have an overall mark on this show spanning generations and different eras and different cast members that they really just, they're ones where they first ballot Hall of Famers, no. But at the end of the day, do they belong in the Hall of Fame? 100%.
Yeah, it's hard to tell the story of SNL without bringing up Al Franken and Tom Davis. Bill, what do you think?
100%. Same here. I said this on an earlier roundtable. Like, to have that corner of the show, the Franken and Davis show, laid the groundwork for things like Lonely Island, Please Don't Destroy, and got to know these guys in a way that you didn't get to know writers back then. And I think that's really important. And I have a hard time, as Brad mentions, like, do you include the stuff that they did separately? I can do that with the writing. I can't do that with things like Stuart Smalley, because then he falls off my ballot very quickly.
I agree. I agree totally with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just not great. And it is interesting. It's one of those big what ifs in the history of the show. Not only with them taking over the show in 1980, but what would have happened if he had gotten Weekend Update instead of Norm in 95? How different would the show be with the OJ jokes and things like that? Does that change the trajectory of the show? Franken is such an important voice still today, and I think they definitely have to be in. They're such an integral part of those first 5 years.
And if you want more of Bill's thoughts, you could go to Letterboxd and read his review of Stort Saves His Family, and you'll get all you need to know.
Double feature with It's Pat.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, Mike, Franken and Davis?
Well, if it was Brad's idea to make them a team on the ballot, then I fully support that decision of Franken and Davis being that writing team. And we've seen, laid the groundwork for, like he said, Lonely Island, and to this day, Please Don't Destroy, or Streeter Seidel and Mikey Day, even the current era. So Franken and Davis were this team, of course, that were there at the beginning and just like steered the ship. I think if you didn't have people like them in the room, maybe the O'Donohues might have been off the rails. So they were somebody who understood the tone, kept it funny, and they could play it safe. They could not. But I also wanted to throw out that, like, SNL commercials are such a staple of the show to this day, and I can't think of Franken and Davis without thinking of, like, these really quiet commercials with maybe not even actors in them, just a voice, but they were so sharp, so just cutting and funny. And I'm thinking of even like Pong, like that's a famous one. I don't know if they consider that a commercial, but these kind of pre-tapes, for lack of a better word, and Franken and Davis as a team, easy for me. I agree with Brad, I probably wouldn't have put them in first ballot, but seeing them on the ballot now, I think it's an easy call for me. So yeah, you guys are making my life easy on this pod tonight.
Yeah, I'm enjoying all this love for the writers. Hopefully the voters at large will start giving the writers their due, and we'll see an influx of them here in season 4. It's actually been a while since we've talked about a host. Do any of you have any more hosts on your ballot and want to chime in?
I do, actually. I think my last 2, or I may actually have one more, but so I'm going to go with one that could be controversial, could be not, but I'm going to go with Justin Timberlake for a host, because if you point to a past 30 years even, or 25 years host who like really got the show and brought 100% and was actually really good, not just someone that we were happy to see on the show, it's Timberlake. I think about, we mentioned Omeletville and stuff for Paul Appel, but Barry Gibb talk show, his synergy with Fallon, and obviously synergy with Lonely Island for Dick in a Box, Mother Lover, and Three Way, those 3 sketches they did. And I think he just is important. I hate to use this crutch because I think it's overused by people like us of like saving the show. How many times can a show be saved? Is it always failing if it needs to be saved? But I think not. He didn't save the show, but he revitalized it for a new generation. So you could be somebody who never listened to his music or even knew he was in sync. But when he came to SNL, he seemed like he fit. He worked with everyone really well. Everyone seemed like they were having a really fun time, which is I think a good thing for the cast. So they make funny material for us to enjoy. So Justin Timberlake is someone that I did think about a lot, and I said to myself, this is somebody that for a host category is pretty easy for me. So I'm going with JT.
Yeah, he's somebody that if none of you brought him up, I was gonna after we finished all this, ask you why. I'm surprised he's not in already, especially given he's fairly current. He's still pretty popular. So Justin Timberlake, definitely surprised to me that he's not in. Bill, do you have Justin Timberlake on your list?
Let's say that somewhere our good friend John Schneider's head was exploding, that it took us an hour and 20 minutes to bring up JT. Yes, he is on my list. I mentioned earlier with Buck Henry, the kind of hosts that you look forward to, that you knew you were going to get a good show. Some would argue that it was too formulaic. It was too, cut and paste with the different sketches that he did. I call bullshit, because I think everything that he did was really funny. Was there diminishing returns? Maybe. Is that why he hasn't come back in 10 years, which is crazy? Possibly. But every time he was on, it was a good time. Everything that Mike mentioned. Also, he was in the first Maryville Love Tunnel. And what else? The Hip Hop Kids. Yeah, there's so much to talk about with JT. The two things I always joke about, like if you put me in a time machine back to 2000 and you told me that the kid from NSYNC would be the best host of this last couple decades, and the kid from Good Burger would be on the show for 21 years, I would have asked what drugs you were on. So it's pretty amazing to see what he was able to do on the show. Love JT.
Yes. Brad, did you vote for Justin Timberlake, and why not?
Oh, Thomas. I did not. It's another one. I don't dislike him. I don't have a good reason why not. I want to see like a Buck Henry in. Listening to these guys' arguments, I feel like a Candace Bergen needs to get in before him. And my ballot's writer heavy. Like, I wanted to save my votes for, the writers and the Jan Hooks, who I really think needed to get in. And I think I did that with just a lot of the people that I left off. It's like, well, until I get Jan Hooks in, I'm not voting you in. Until I get this person, I'm not getting you in. That's really all I think this was.
Okay. So we can actually pinpoint this moment as the reason why you're disinvited from John Schneider's podcast for the foreseeable future.
You make it sound like I've been invited before. No, I'm just kidding. Now we know why I haven't been.
There you go. He just knew that you were withholding a vote for JT. All right, Brad, who's next on your list that you want to bring up?
I'm trying to look at how many other old writers I still have. I'm going to go with, I think this is my last writer. Is it? Yes. Who probably most people haven't heard of. Herb Sargent. Mm-hmm. Herb Sargent was there from the very beginning, pretty much kind of was the co-creator of one of the longest, still running bits of Weekend Update with Chevy and Lauren. Was a head writer for a bit. It's one of those guys who, again, those writers back in the day, like no one really knew who they were unless they were a Franken and Davis and showed up on screen. So you didn't know who, and a lot of times writers were often like writing stuff uncredited for other people. But like Herb Sargent was just so integral in those first 5 years of the show and its creation and what it was. And this is so lame, but like father figure's the wrong word, but he was the older guy of the group.
No,
these were all these young, punk rebel kids coming in, and Herb Sargent was one of the older guys at that point. And then he stayed on for so long and had such a long tenure. Like, he's another one, I feel like I've used this phrase repeatedly, but like his fingerprints are all over this show. And I don't think this show is what it is without someone like Herb Sargent, or specifically Herb Sargent, throughout its history from literally day one.
Yeah, so you're back on John Schneider's good side, Brad, because John was my guest for the Herb Sargent episode. Thought he'd made a really compelling case. Actually, I honestly learned a lot about Herb Sargent by prepping for that show and talking to John and everything. So Herb definitely a huge part of why SNL was created and why it blossomed and everything. Bill, how do you feel about Herb Sargent's candidacy?
Love Herb Sargent. Back when I was beginning my SNL fandom, there was a book, which you probably all are familiar with, Saturday Night by Doug Hill. And it was basically the first 10 years of the show. And we didn't have the World Wide Web back then. So to be able to have this book that was dog-eared by the time I was done with it and learn all these writers' names, all of these people who were integral to the show who I had no idea who they were as a 12-year-old boy. Herb Sargent is all over that book. I learned about him. I loved him ever since. Weekend Update, and also he created the Not Ready for Primetime Players moniker, because if you don't know, there was another show called Saturday Night Live in 1975 with Howard Cosell, which had the name Primetime Players, which it only lasted half a season, but he was a huge name at the time. And Herb Sargent said, let's just call him Not Ready for Primetime Players. So he gets credit for two of the things that have really withstood the test of time. They obviously don't call the cast that now, but if you say those words, most people know what that means. Yeah, Weekend Update, he would scour the papers. He would scour hundreds of papers to find clips and articles that were funny for Weekend Update that night. So, integral to the, as Brad said, to the history of the show, was there for almost 20 years. So, and the only time he wasn't there is when Weekend Update wasn't Weekend Update, and it was terrible. So you can tell how important he was just by that. So
yeah, and before he joined SNL, Herb Sargent had a lot of experience already in TV, and I think he actually took a pay cut to join SNL and help it get it on its feet and everything, because he believed in the format, he believed in Lorne Michaels. So Herb did them a solid by even being part of the show, honestly.
He was the first head writer of the Johnny Carson Tonight Show. Yep. So, yeah, he goes way back.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think? Herb Sargent on your ballot?
He was not on my ballot, and I did leave a space, and I have a note here in front of me that was save a spot for Sargent, I wrote, because I had some empty spots, and I realized I'm like, if Bill and Brad are thinking like me, this might just be writer's night at the SNL Hall of Fame. And I know what he did to the show, and he was 52 in season 1, so he was the elder statesman in the room. He's older than Lorne. I guess if Herb was around today, he'd be 100. So I felt like he was on the ballot last year, and hopefully the Herb Sargent awareness campaign can continue for the next 2 seasons of this show, where he's getting up into the 30s. And he'll have my vote for sure. So again, Bill, Brad, you can convince me. I'll throw him on there. I mean, so deserving, obviously. But in this case, when I was looking at I did not want to go full 15, so he had to be a casualty. But somebody that I didn't want to go all writers. So maybe I was unfair to our friend Herb.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
All right. Yeah. So I think we talked somebody, maybe Mike Inns, we influence someone's vote here on the roundtable. So
yeah, I mean, Weekend Update. I mean, to this day,
exactly.
He could be credited in the credits for the writers for that reason only.
All right, Mike. So I think you might have 1 or 2 votes left on your ballot. So who do you want to talk about here?
Yep, I have 1 left, and then I had 2 spots open. 1 was for Herb, and 1 was for another cast member. So I'll stick with my guns and go with my original list and say John Mulaney. So that's who I'm going with. And again, because I keep forgetting, this is for host, not writing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
that's
John Mulaney
fine with me.
is on the ballot as a host.
All right. Of course, I got to scrap all my writer's notes that I wrote down because I have more of those, which might hold my argument in contempt. But John Mulaney as a 5-timer, very Buck Henry-esque. No, I mean, coming in as somebody who, when he hosted the show, if you were not an SNL head and you didn't listen to like New in Town, you might not know who the hell this guy was. And his style is so SNL, of course, because he just stopped working there. And I think, I got to throw away all my writer's notes, but New York City Musical. I mean, come on. To have a recurring sketch in every one of your hosting stints, I'd love to see some research on that for sure. To have something that's a staple in your first 5 hosting stints. And if he hosts for a 6th time, I feel like he almost is legally obliged to do it again. So John Mulaney, I figured would be a little controversial because when I did write this down, I did look at Thomas's list, and he was a host. Of course, today I'm thinking of all my favorite Mulaney sketches he wrote, but in this case, I still feel confident because of what I just said, of how quickly it happened, and I thought that he might not get a lot of votes in that category, and I think he's deserving. So that's my last in stone pick is Mulaney for a host.
Brad, John Mulaney is a white guy, and he was a writer, even though he's a host on this ballot. Do you have John Mulaney on your ballot?
When you put it that way, I guess no, I don't. I do not, and I'm fine with that. I enjoy him more as a writer than a host. He's an okay host. I loved his I loved the musical sketches they did. I do think they got progressively less enjoyable and funny as they went on. But other than that in a monologue, there wasn't much I looked forward to in a John Mulaney episode when he hosted.
Monkey Judge. I'm saying this, it's one of my
You're
favorite.
judge, you're a monkey judge.
That's one of my favorite sketches over the past few years, honestly, and that was like Mulaney like carrying that. But I think Cecily did a good job in the sketch too, but that was like quintessential. Like I loved Mulaney in that. So it wasn't just the musical sketches. It was Monkey Judge too.
Okay.
Bill, what do you think of John Mulaney as a host?
This was probably the toughest cut for me. He was on my ballot the last couple of years. He did not make it this time, mostly because of all the writers that really need to get in. I love his hosting gigs. I think he's up there with, if it was announced tomorrow that he was coming back to host, we as SNL community would be pretty psyched. I mean, obviously there's a few people that would be above him. Eddie, please come back. But he's up there for sure. The fact that, he's probably one of the biggest stand-ups in the world right now, with all the struggles he's gone through, his celebrity marriage, there's a lot to enjoy and watch about Mulaney, but I had to cut him, unfortunately. Hopefully he doesn't slide any more than he did last year.
All right, fair enough. So, Brad, I believe you're down to 2 votes left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
You want to share one of those with us?
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how this one goes over. I have another cast member who's been on for a few ballots and is someone who I wouldn't have said as a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I think definitely deserves to be in. Team player, another one who's got, impressions, characters, always, commitment to the bit. Molly Shannon. I've got Molly Shannon, who I feel like her time has come. And I feel like, the era she was in and I think she played a big role in that era and maybe underlooked a little bit, but the thing I love most about Molly Shannon, it's hard to find a sketch with her where she's not committed 100%. I love that. I love that no matter how outrageous or silly or absurd or even just small, she goes for it and is all in. And I love that. And so, I got Molly in finally.
Yeah, Molly's one, Bill, where if I look at my ballot, I do think it's time to put her in, and I think she would get a vote from me. Do you feel similarly, Bill?
She's on the cusp for me. She didn't make it, much for the same reasons that I said about Mulaney. I was very writer heavy. But yes, she is very deserving. Great 7 seasons. While not a golden era, definitely a silver era, and held her own against heavyweights like Will Ferrell. Love Dog Show, Mary Catherine Gallagher, Jeannie Darcy. When she came back to host last year, it was such a joy to see her work with these younger cast members and to see her mesh with these people who are 20 years younger than her and still hold her own. So I think she gets in at some point, but she didn't make my ballot.
And Mike, it looks like Molly didn't make the cut for you. Probably no offense to her, but if you want to elaborate on why a little bit.
Sure, and that was the cast member I was alluding to a moment ago, talking about my save a spot for Sergeant note is Molly Shannon, because I realized when I did my original list, I didn't include her, and then I looked back and I saw that it was her 4th ballot, and I didn't want to be a hypocrite and say I was just voting for her for that reason, because I know that there are other writers we talked about that desperately need that push from us. So I allocated more resources to them. But I have no problem if Molly Shannon's in the Hall of Fame. Personally, I was never a huge fan of her on SNL when I go back and rewatch. But again, I said earlier that that's something that we have to consider as voters, but also consider that the impact is not up for debate because, as Bill said, her great characters. So just so on the bubble for me, and I wanted to save some spots because I figured you fellas would convince me of either Molly or others. So I stayed with, I think, 12.
Yeah, and Molly's trending in the right direction. So she is from season 1. Jamie Burwood was on with Jamie Dew talking about Molly Shannon. Molly received about 35% of the vote in season 1. That went up to 47.4 in season 2, 54.2 in season 3. I'm no mathematician, but I think that's like a positive trend there. So for Molly Shannon, so I would like to see her in the Hall. Probably a good chance she'll get in. If not, it'll probably be close. So I'm rooting for you, Molly. So Bill, it seems like you have one left. Maybe who was that one?
Just one. Throwing a little bit of a curveball. Hopefully, there's enough people out there who remember this fellow. But, we've talked a lot, myself included, about saving the show. This guy literally saved the show. Talking about Dick Ebersol.
That was mine.
Sorry.
You're not that's not as kooky of a pick as you thought.
No.
Okay.
Damn. All right,
I love
Bill.
it, though. That's great, Bill. Like, educate anybody who needs more further education about Dick Ebersol.
Listen, he did a lot of the legwork when the show was starting. He was director of late night at the time, and when they were trying to replace Carson's repeats on Saturday nights in '75. And he worked with Lorne a lot those early years. And then, obviously, when season 6 happened and Domanion, he took over the show. And the show was as close to cancellation as it's ever been. And he brought it back from the dead. Now, you can say season 7's not great, but he was laying the groundwork for what are very serviceable seasons. Does a lot of that credit go to Eddie and Joe Piscopo? Obviously. But he kept the show going. He took chances that Lorne doesn't take anymore. Some of them I don't agree with, like getting rid of Live from New York, getting rid of Don Pardo. But he thought outside the box. Now, he almost destroyed the show after season 10 when he wanted to go to all pre-tapes, and we'd be sitting here talking about Saturday night pre-tape 50 years later. So luckily, the stars aligned and Lorne came back and saved the live format. But Ebersol kept the ship going for that 4+ seasons and deserves to get in.
And there are plenty of people. There's people currently in the SNL Hall of Fame who almost destroyed the show. That's almost like kind of comes with the territory. So not too big of a black mark for Dick Ebersol. Brad, that was your last vote too.
Yeah, that was my throwaway. I feel like Dick Ebersol will never get voted in. I wouldn't be surprised if he fell off the ballot after this one, which is why I wanted to bring him up to give him one last shot to get his name out there. 2 reasons, which everything Bill had just said, working backwards, the fact that he did come back in after season 6 and help save the show and keep it, if not save it, at least keep it alive for Lorne to come back and save it. But you can't belittle that fact. But also his involvement in the creation of the show. You ask anybody, with the exception of maybe Albert Brooks, like Dick Ebersol is one of the key... You like that one, Bill? Dick Ebersol was huge. Like Bill said, Dick was figuring out a show to replace Johnny Carson before Lorne came on. Dick had an idea for a variety show. That had like revolving host of Carlin and Lily Tomlin and Richard Pryor. So he had started the ball rolling a little bit, and then when Lorne came in, it was like, this is the perfect match, and they made it work. And then he got pushed out of the show a bit, but you can't underestimate how valuable he was to Lorne and to the creation of the show. And he was really that middleman between Lorne and the network when that show was growing, giving Lorne the space he needed to create the show. So he's somebody who I don't think gets enough credit. I'm not a big Dick Ebersol fan, but in doing our show and going back to those early years, just really appreciating and respecting what he did for the show is something you've got to take hold. And I'm amazed, Bill. Thank you so much that you put him down, because I thought this was literally going to be like one swan song to like get his name out there before he started getting put up for the Don Pardo Award.
Yeah, no, Dick Ebersol would be on my ballot too, honestly. And he received
All right.
a little over 21% of the vote, so not bad. I don't think that's not enough to be off the ballot. So I think he'll probably stay on the ballot. I doubt he'll get voted in, but he'll be on the ballot. 21% is not terrible, honestly, for Ebersol. Mike, what do you think? Like, Ebersol important to SNL's history?
Yeah, super important. Not on my ballot. I think when you look at it and say, SNL created by Dick Ebersol, you say, oh, obvious, but I will have to fully admit to falling for what Bill said with where SNL could have gone. So I with Lorne, if Lorne didn't come back, I just don't think SNL would exist today. And is that fully, can I pin that on Dick Ebersol? Like, of course not. Like, so many factors involved. But when I'm thinking about Hall of Fame, I just said, this time not on my ballot, and is a perfect candidate for the Don Pardo Award. So thinking back to when they do like the builders and the framers of sports Hall of Fames, putting Fritz Pollard in like the NFL, Pro Football Hall of Fame, things like that you have to consider because, you can't judge his comedy on the show. So that's, you guys put Lorne right in, right?
Yeah, we did. He was the
okay.
first,
So this could be a case where if that show happens, I'll happily listen to it and celebrate Dick Ebersol, and he can go in and with no argument from me. But as a personal voter on this show, I was saying I'm not going to get my vote tonight just because SNL, the live part of it is so important to me. And if the show went that way, that would be unforgivable in my eyes. So he lost my vote tonight. But no arguments to Brad and Bill for sure.
Yeah, that's all fair, definitely. So, if I'm counting correctly, I think everybody's exhausted their ballot. So, pat yourselves on the back. We did it, everybody. Good job, folks. All right. Then looking at the voting, there's not anybody, because I was going to bring up Justin Timberlake if nobody brought them up. I was going to bring up Dick Ebersol if nobody brought them up. So, there are people at the end there where I was kind of surprised we hadn't heard from, but then we ended up. So hopefully, I think a big trend I saw with the three of you was giving writers love. Hopefully we see that with the larger voting base. But I think all in all, I like all your ballots. I think you made very good cases. So I appreciate you guys coming on the roundtable. So before we go, I want to thank you guys, Mike Murray. Your first time here on the SNL Hall of Fame. Hopefully it won't be the last. What do you got to promote?
Well, I had a great time. This is so cool talking to people who are just as much of weirdos as me and like to talk about, be on a weeknight and talk about Dick Ebersol. Where do you get that anywhere else? So love all you guys and had a blast. So yeah, I'll happily come back and talk about whoever you want. But as far as me on the Saturday Night Network, Wednesdays following live SNL, I host a show called By the Numbers. I measure right after the show that weekend. I measure all the screen time, appearances, and I have the ultimate original SNL stat called the Power Ranking, which I do this giant algorithm to measure an impact on an episode. So it's a stat that I am really proud of because if you look over 100 episodes, you can really get a great idea of the impact that an individual, whether it be host, cast, musical guest. So it might be a good companion to this show someday when I have an extra 25,000 hours to get all 953 shows on my belt. But until then, check me out Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's a really fun show. It's like sports talk radio, but about SNL.
Yeah, I love listening to that show. And I just remembered, so Bill and I both snuck in a Lorne Michaels impression. I want to put you and Brad on the spot because I don't want us to leave here with only Bill and I having done one. Mike, do you have a Lorne?
I have a private Lorne.
Oh, okay. Fair.
Mike,
okay,
you can answer no to that question because
Brad, do you have a Lorne?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
I feel like everyone does. So.
Yeah. All right, Brad, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you genuinely.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you so much. I know we kid each other a lot, but I do love getting to talk to you.
Yeah, you're awesome. I love your podcast. You and Gary do such a great job. Tell us about what's going on over there on the Not Ready for Primetime podcast.
Yes, we're the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're deep diving into the original era of Saturday Night Live, the first 5 seasons. Every episode, we take a different episode in chronological order from season 1, episode 1. We're going to cover the first 5 seasons. We're currently plowing through season 2. We're about halfway through right now. We drop episodes every Tuesday. Often it's Gary and myself. We get a lot of great hosts like yourself, and John Snyder from the SSN's been on a bunch. We've got some really cool guests coming on this season that haven't come on yet. And we're on the social media platforms at Not Ready for PT Pod. So yeah, check us out, please.
Yeah, what a great recent addition to the SNL podcasting community. You guys are so great. And I've turned into the British correspondent on your show.
Yeah.
So 2 Eric Idle episodes, or 1 Dudley Moore. It was the Dudley Moore and Peter Cook episode, and then the Eric Idle episode in season 1. So I'm your official British correspondent, and I'm happy to be that for you. Thank you. Bill Kenney, Mr. Bill, where could we find you?
Well, thank you for having me, Thomas. This was a lot of fun. Always fun to enter the Hall of Fame and take my shoes off. Or wipe my shoes. Excuse me.
Yeah, damn it. Wipe your
I
shoes
take my
before
shoes
you
off.
come into the hall.
I'm wearing clean socks. Come on. You can find me on any of the plethora of Saturday Night Network podcasts from week to week. We talk about current SNL, and it's a lot of fun. Get to talk to Mike a lot and get to talk to you sometimes as well. So a lot of fun shows. Go check it out.
Yes, and you were my guest for the most recent episode that we released, Jason Sudeikis. That was the final episode for nominees. And so I want to remind everybody that voting opened on December 5th. It will close on Friday, December 15th at midnight, and then we will reveal the results on the 18th. We're scheduled to do that. You can go register to vote at snlhof.com. If you're a past voter, Mr. Jamie Dew, JD, will email a ballot to you. So that's how you can get your hands on a ballot and cast your vote, make your voice heard for the SNL Hall of Fame. All right, so for Brad Robinson, Bill Kenney, and Mike Murray, I'm Thomas Senna. See you next time on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNLHOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.